Before we begin, let me ask you a question. If you could return to just one moment in your life, only one, would you change it? Most people answer that question far more quickly than they expect. Not because they have lived a difficult life, but because there is one memory that never truly left them. A conversation they wish had ended differently. A decision they still question. A goodbye they never imagined would be the last. Or a single moment they quietly believed changed everything. It is strange. Thousands of ordinary days disappear without asking our permission. Yet one painful moment can stay with us for years. Sometimes, for an entire lifetime. Our lives continue. Our faces change. The seasons come and go. Children become adults. Parents grow older. Friends slowly become cherished memories. The world keeps moving, but somewhere deep inside, a small part of us refuses to leave the past behind. Perhaps there is still a younger version of you, standing in one unforgettable moment, believing that one mistake, one choice, or one painful day defines who you are forever. If that feels familiar, then this journey is for you. Before we continue, I would love to know where you are listening from. And if you would like, leave just one word in the comments. One word that describes what your heart has been carrying. Regret, grief, fear, hope, peace. Sometimes, seeing a single word written by another person reminds us that we have never been walking this path alone, hidden among quiet mountains. Far from busy roads and crowded towns, there stood an old temple. It was not famous. Travelers rarely searched for it. Its wooden walls had faded beneath countless seasons. Its stone pathway had been shaped smooth by generations of footsteps. Nothing about the place demanded attention, yet everything about it invited stillness. Each breeze seemed softer there. Each bird sang without hurry. Even silence felt alive. Near the entrance, an elderly monk slowly swept the stone courtyard with an old bamboo broom. The broom had clearly been repaired many times. Its handle was polished, smooth by years of faithful hands. A few strands of bamboo had begun to separate, yet he held it with remarkable care, not because it was valuable, but because he was fully present. He swept one small section of stone, paused, watched a single leaf drift gently to the ground, then swept again. There was no urgency, no distraction, no struggle. Only complete attention. Many people spend their entire lives searching for peace. Yet here, peace seemed to exist inside the simplest movement. Far below the mountain, another man was making his way toward the temple. Age had slowed his steps. His knees complained with every climb. His breathing had grown heavier over the years. But none of those things explained the weight he carried. His burden could not be placed on the ground. It could not be measured. It had no name anyone else could see. For longer than he wished to remember, he had carried a single memory wherever he went. He remembered the sound. He remembered the silence that followed. He remembered every word, every expression, every feeling. Pain has a curious way of preserving details that happiness quietly forgets. During those years, many people had forgiven him. Some told him he had done the best he could. Others embraced him without asking questions. Some simply sat beside him until the tears stopped. He appreciated every act of kindness. Yet each time he returned home, he became his own harshest judge once again. There are prisons built from stone. There are prisons built from iron. But perhaps the strongest prisons are built from the stories we continue telling ourselves. When the traveler finally reached the temple gate, he stopped. The monk did not look up immediately. He finished the single sweep he had already begun. Only then did he gently rest the broom against the ground. Several quiet moments passed. Neither man seemed eager to fill the silence. At last, the traveler bowed. "I have come a very long way." The monk smiled kindly. "I can see that." The traveler looked confused. "We have never met." "No, we have not." The monk's eyes rested gently upon him. "But I recognized the weight before I recognized the man." The traveler said nothing. The monk continued. "Some people climb mountains searching for answers. Some climb because they hope to leave something behind." He paused, then asked a question the traveler had never heard before. "But tell me, who convinced you that you had to carry this burden for the rest of your life?" The traveler searched for an answer. None came. For the first time, he realized something unexpected. He could remember exactly when the pain had begun, but he could no longer remember when he had decided never to put it down. And sometimes, freedom begins not when we discover an answer, but when we finally question a belief we have carried for far too long. The monk did not ask another question. Instead, he picked up the bamboo broom once more and continued sweeping the courtyard. The traveler stood quietly, unsure whether he had already received the answer or whether the lesson had not yet begun. For a while, only the gentle sound of bamboo brushing across worn stone filled the air. It was such an ordinary sound, the kind most people would never notice. Yet somehow, the longer he listened, the more something inside him began to slow. His breathing softened, his shoulders lowered. Even the endless conversation inside his own mind seemed to lose its urgency. After several moments, the monk finally spoke. "Tell me, when you began climbing this mountain, did your bag feel heavy?" The traveler looked down. "It did. And now?" He adjusted the worn leather strap across his shoulder. "It feels heavier." The monk nodded. "But did you place anything inside it while you were walking?" "No. So why does it feel heavier?" The traveler hesitated. "I suppose I have become tired." The monk smiled gently. "Exactly. The weight did not change. You changed." The traveler stared quietly at the old man. The monk rested both hands on the broom. "The same is true of suffering. Many people spend years trying to throw away their pain, but often the pain has not grown heavier. The heart has simply grown tired of carrying it." The words settled gently into the silence. The traveler thought about the memory he had carried for so long. Perhaps it had never become larger. Perhaps he had simply become exhausted. The realization surprised him. For years, he had blamed the memory. had never considered that exhaustion itself might be deepening his suffering. A cool breeze wandered through the cedar trees. Several leaves drifted slowly onto the stone path. Without hesitation, the monk swept them aside. Not with frustration, not with impatience, simply because that was what the moment required. The traveler watched every movement. Finally, he asked, "Do you never become tired of sweeping?" The monk chuckled softly. "I do. Then why continue?" The old monk looked toward the mountains. "Because tomorrow there will be more leaves." The traveler frowned. "Then the work is endless." "Yes, it is." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then the monk continued, "But I am not sweeping to create a courtyard where no leaves will ever fall. I am sweeping because leaves belong to the trees, and caring belongs to me." The traveler felt those words settle somewhere deep inside him. For years, he had believed healing meant reaching a day when painful memories would never return, a day when regret would disappear forever, a day when he would never think about the past again. Perhaps he had been waiting for something that was never meant to happen. The monk seemed to sense his thoughts. "Have you ever watched the sky?" The traveler nodded. "Do clouds stop appearing simply because yesterday's clouds disappeared?" "No. And yet, does the sky complain?" Again, the traveler answered quietly, "No. The sky does not become the clouds. It simply allows them to pass." The monk looked directly into the traveler's eyes. "But people, we do something very different. A painful thought appears, and before long, we introduce ourselves by it. I am my failure. I am my regret. I am the worst thing I have ever done." He shook his head slowly. "No. You are the one who is noticing those thoughts. You have never been the thoughts themselves." The traveler lowered his eyes. No one had ever said that to him before. For so many years, he had not merely remembered one painful afternoon. He had become it. Without realizing it, he had built an entire identity around a single moment. A moment that had lasted only a few minutes, yet had quietly ruled decades of his life. The breeze returned once more. A single cedar leaf landed on the traveler's shoulder. He reached up to brush it away, then stopped. The monk smiled. "You see? The leaf rested on you. It never became you." The traveler looked at the small green leaf resting lightly against his worn cloak. Such a tiny thing, so easy to remove. Yet somehow, it carried the weight of an entire lifetime's lesson. Perhaps memories were like leaves. They arrived without asking permission. They rested for a while, and when the time was right, they could be released without tearing away a part of who we are. For the first time in many years, the traveler wondered whether he had been protecting his suffering, not because he loved the pain, but because he had forgotten who he was without it. And that question quietly followed him as the monk picked up the broom and swept another leaf from the ancient stone path. The traveler remained standing in the courtyard. His eyes followed the monk, watching the old bamboo broom move slowly across the stone. For reasons he could not explain, the sweeping no longer looked like cleaning. It looked like listening. Listening to the wind, listening to the leaves, listening to life exactly as it was, without trying to force it into something else. The traveler finally broke the silence. I have tried to leave my past behind. The monk nodded gently. I believe you. I traveled far from the place where it happened. I changed my work. I met new people. I even learned to smile again. He paused. But somehow, it always finds me. The monk smiled. Does it? The traveler looked confused. What do you mean? The old monk slowly walked toward a quiet pond at the edge of the courtyard. Its surface reflected the cedar trees like polished glass. He pointed toward the water. What do you see? My reflection. The monk picked up a tiny pebble. Without a word, he dropped it into the pond. Small circles spread gently across the surface. The reflection disappeared. What do you see now? Only ripples. The monk waited. Neither man spoke. After a few moments, the water became still once again. The reflection quietly returned. The monk looked at the traveler. Did your reflection ever leave the pond? The traveler thought for a moment. No, it was always there. The water simply stopped showing it clearly. The monk nodded. Memories are much the same. They do not disappear. They become quiet. But every time we stir the water, we believe the past has returned. The traveler frowned. I do not understand. The monk smiled kindly. Tell me your story. The traveler looked away. For many years, he had repeated the story countless times, sometimes to friends, sometimes to strangers, most often to himself. He took a slow breath. I failed someone I loved. The monk remained silent. I should have done more. Silence. I should have known. Silence. I should have been there. Still silence. The traveler lowered his head. I ruined everything. Only then did the monk speak. Interesting. The traveler looked surprised. What is? You have told me what you believe, but you have not told me what happened. The traveler blinked. I just did. The monk gently shook his head. No, you gave me your judgment, not your story. The words landed with unexpected force. The traveler opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. Had he really done that? The monk continued softly. When people carry pain for many years, they often stop remembering events. They remember conclusions. I am weak. I am selfish. I am unworthy. I destroy the people I love. He looked toward the quiet pond. These are not memories. They are verdicts. The traveler felt something tighten inside his chest. He had repeated those sentences so often, they no longer sounded like opinions. They sounded like facts. The monk bent down and picked up a fallen cedar leaf. He held it between two fingers. If I place this leaf on the ground, does it become the forest? No. If one branch breaks, does the tree stop being a tree? No. If one season brings a storm, does the mountain forget every spring that came before it again? No, the monk smiled. Then why have you allowed one moment to become your entire life? The traveler had no answer. For years, whenever he remembered that painful day, he never remembered the thousands of quiet kindnesses that came before it. He never remembered the laughter, the birthdays, the ordinary afternoons, the moments of patience, the sacrifices no one had ever seen. His mind returned to the same wound, again and again, until one page had replaced the entire book. The monk looked toward the endless mountains. The mind has an old habit. It takes one painful chapter and quietly renames it. My whole life. A cool breeze crossed the courtyard. The cedar branches whispered above them. The traveler closed his eyes. For the first time, he began to wonder whether he had not been imprisoned by the past, but by the story he had written about it. And if a story could be written, perhaps, one day, it could also be rewritten. The traveler remained beside the quiet pond. The monk's final words echoed gently within him. Perhaps he had not been living inside the past. Perhaps he had been living inside a story he had repeated so many times that it had become more familiar than the truth itself. After a long silence, he finally spoke. If I stop telling myself that story, who will I become? The monk did not answer immediately. Instead, he knelt beside the edge of the pond. His weathered hand reached into the clear water. He lifted a single smooth stone. Its surface had been polished by countless seasons. Holding it carefully, he asked, "How long do you think this stone has been here?" The traveler shrugged. "I cannot know," the monk smiled. "Neither can I. But I do know this. It was not always smooth." He gently turned the stone in his hand. "There was a time when it was rough, a time when sharp edges caught against everything they touched. The river did not change it in one day or one season. It changed because it never stopped flowing." The traveler watched the stone resting in the monk's palm. It looked peaceful, as though it had forgotten every collision that had shaped it. The monk placed it back into the pond. "Tell me, are you the same person you were 20 years ago?" The traveler answered almost without thinking. "No." "The same person you were 10 years ago?" "No." "The same person you were last year?" Again. "No." The monk nodded. "Then why do you continue punishing someone who no longer exists?" The question settled into the silence. The traveler opened his mouth, but no words came. He had never considered that possibility. Every day, he spoke to himself as though he were still standing inside that painful moment, still making the same mistake, still carrying the same fear, still believing he deserved the same punishment. Yet the man standing beside this pond was older, kinder, wiser, far more compassionate than the frightened man he once had been. Still, he insisted on judging himself as though nothing had ever changed. The monk continued softly. "There is something curious about human beings. We allow everyone else to grow. A child becomes an adult. A student becomes a teacher. A stranger becomes a friend. We understand that people change. But when it comes to ourselves, we refuse to believe it." The traveler slowly lowered his eyes. How many years had he spent apologizing to a version of himself that no longer breathed? The monk picked up a fallen branch. With one gentle movement, he drew 2 circles in the sand. One was small, the other much larger. "This," he said, pointing to the smaller circle, "is the person who made the mistake." Then he pointed to the larger one. "And this is the person who has lived with that mistake." The traveler looked carefully. The second circle surrounded the first completely. Years of learning, years of sorrow, years of kindness, years of quiet understanding. Everything he had become had grown around that single moment, yet somehow his eyes had never left the smaller circle. The monk erased the smaller circle with the side of his hand. Only the larger one remained. "Tell me, did the larger circle disappear?" The traveler whispered. "No, the past is part of you." "It is not all of you." The wind moved gently through the cedar branches. Somewhere nearby, a bird landed upon an old wooden fence. Then, just as easily, it flew away again. The traveler watched until it disappeared into the trees. How many times had life tried to show him this lesson? Everything changes. Clouds, rivers, forests, seasons, even mountains slowly become something new. Only the human mind insists on freezing one moment and calling it forever. The monk looked toward the distant hills. There is a reason rivers never apologize for where they have been. They understand that flowing forward is their nature. He turned back toward the traveler. "And becoming someone new is yours." The traveler closed his eyes. For the first time in many years, he did not picture the man he had once been. He pictured the man standing here now, the lines upon his hands, the gentleness that suffering had quietly taught him, the compassion he freely offered to strangers, the patience he never possessed in his youth. Perhaps the person he kept condemning had disappeared long ago. Perhaps only the judge remained, and perhaps the judge was finally growing tired. The traveler remained silent. The monk did not interrupt his thoughts. There was no need. Some truths, once they enter the heart, need no explanation, only space. A gentle breeze wandered through the courtyard. The cedar branches swayed softly above them. Some leaves drifted to the ground. The monk watched them fall, then quietly returned to sweeping. The traveler noticed something he had not seen before. The monk never chased a falling leaf. He never reached into the air to catch it. He simply waited until it landed. Only then did he gently sweep it away. The traveler found himself asking, "Why do you always wait?" The monk smiled. "Because every leaf knows where it must land." He swept another slow circle across the stone. "If I try to catch it before it is ready, I only disturb the wind." The traveler considered those words. How many times had he tried to force healing? How many books had he read? How many promises had he made to himself? Beginning tomorrow, I will stop thinking about it. Beginning next month, I will finally forgive myself. Beginning next year, I will become someone different. Yet every promise became another disappointment. Every deadline became another reason to believe he had failed. The monk looked toward him. "You have been trying to escape your suffering," the traveler nodded. "Yes, but suffering runs faster than the one who flees." The traveler frowned. "Then what should I do?" The monk rested the broom against the old wooden wall. He walked slowly toward the center of the courtyard. There is an old story. Many years ago, a man dreamed that he had been locked inside a dark prison. He searched every wall. He pushed every stone. He cried for help until his voice disappeared. He spent years believing someone had trapped him. The monk paused. When he finally became too tired to continue, he leaned against the great wooden gate. It slowly opened. The traveler listened without speaking. The gate, the monk said softly, had never been locked. The words seemed almost too simple, yet they struck somewhere far deeper than complicated wisdom ever could. The monk continued, "Most prisons are exactly like that. We believe we cannot leave, so we never test the door." The traveler lowered his eyes. For years, he had assumed there was no path back to peace. He had never questioned that belief. He had simply accepted it, not because anyone else had condemned him, but because he had condemned himself. The monk picked up a small wooden bucket standing beside the well. It was filled with clear water. He placed it between them. "Look inside," the traveler did. He saw his reflection, older than he remembered, lines around his eyes, grey in his beard, a face marked by years of quiet struggle. "What do you see?" "Myself." The monk gently stirred the water with one finger. The reflection disappeared beneath gentle ripples. "And now?" "Nothing clearly." The monk nodded. "When your mind is disturbed, you mistake distortion for truth. You believe what you see. You believe what you feel. You believe every fearful thought." He allowed the water to become still again. The traveler's reflection quietly returned. The reflection did not need to change. The water only needed to become calm. The traveler stared into the bucket. How many decisions had he made while his heart was restless? How many cruel things had he believed about himself, simply because his thoughts had been unsettled? The monk spoke again. "Never trust every thought that arrives during a storm. Storms are loud, but they are rarely accurate." The traveler slowly smiled. It was small, almost invisible. Perhaps the first genuine smile he had worn in many years. The monk noticed, but said nothing. Some moments become smaller, the moment they are pointed out. Silence returned once more. Not an empty silence, a healing silence. The traveler looked across the courtyard. For the first time, he noticed details that had escaped him before. Tiny green moss growing between ancient stones, the quiet rhythm of the broom, the distant sound of flowing water, the fragrance of cedar carried gently by the wind. None of those things had appeared only now. They had always been there. His troubled mind had simply been too crowded to notice them. Perhaps peace had been the same. Not something to create, not something to earn, not something waiting somewhere beyond the next mountain. Perhaps it had always been quietly waiting, behind the endless noise he carried within himself. The monk lifted the broom once more. He looked at the traveler with gentle eyes, then asked one final question. "If you opened the prison door today, would you know how to live as a free man?" The traveler did not answer, because for the first time he realized freedom could feel just as unfamiliar as suffering once had. The question remained in the air. If you opened the prison door today, would you know how to live as a free man? The traveler did not answer, not because he refused to, but because he genuinely did not know. He had lived with guilt for so many years that he no longer remembered who he had been before it. The monk did not wait for a reply. He slowly walked toward an old cedar tree standing near the edge of the courtyard. Its trunk was wide. Its bark carried the marks of countless seasons. Storms had bent its branches. Lightning had scarred one side of its trunk, yet it remained firmly rooted. The monk rested his hand against the rough bark. "Tell me, what do you see?" The traveler looked carefully. "A very old tree." What else? It has been damaged, the monk smiled. Yes, it has. But would you call it a broken tree? The traveler studied it again. For the first time, he noticed tiny green shoots growing from one of the oldest branches. Birds had built a nest high above them. Fresh needles covered the outer limbs. Life had never stopped flowing through it. No, he admitted quietly. It is still alive, the monk nodded. So why do you call yourself broken? When you continue to grow? The traveler lowered his eyes. He had no answer. For years, he had believed guilt was proof that he cared, proof that he loved deeply, proof that he was taking responsibility. Without guilt, he feared he would become careless. Without guilt, he feared he would dishonor the people he had hurt. The monk seemed to hear the thoughts that remained unspoken. There is something many people misunderstand. They believe guilt and love are the same thing. They are not. The traveler looked up. If I stop feeling guilty, does that not mean I no longer care? The monk gently shook his head. No, it means you have finally stopped hurting yourself. He paused. Love remembers, guilt repeats. Love learns, guilt punishes. Love opens the heart. Guilt keeps the wound alive. The traveler felt those words settle deep inside him. How many times had he confused punishment with responsibility? How many years had he believed that suffering was the price of love? The monk picked up a small clay cup resting beside the temple steps. It had a thin crack running from its rim almost to its base. He filled it with water from a nearby jar. The traveler watched carefully. The cup did not leak. The monk held it out. Would you refuse this cup because it has a crack? The traveler smiled faintly. No, it still serves its purpose. The monk nodded. And yet, when people discover a crack within themselves, they decide they are no longer worthy of being held. The traveler looked down at his own hands, the scars, the wrinkles, the trembling that had come with age. For years, he had looked at himself the same way he imagined others would look at that cracked cup, damaged, less valuable, never quite enough. The monk carefully placed the cup back upon the stone. In this temple, we keep every cracked cup, every repaired bowl, every weathered broom, because time has touched them, and time touches everything. The traveler felt an unexpected warmth rise inside his chest. Perhaps he had been measuring himself by a standard that nothing in nature had ever followed. The oldest tree carried scars. The oldest stones carried cracks. Even the temple itself leaned slightly after so many years. Yet none of those things had become less beautiful, only more honest. The monk looked toward the mountains. There is another reason people hold on to guilt. The traveler waited. They fear forgiveness will erase the lesson. He nodded slowly. I have thought that. The monk smiled kindly. But tell me, has your suffering made the lesson clearer, or has it only made you tired? The traveler closed his eyes. He knew the answer immediately. He had learned the lesson many years ago. Everything after that had simply been punishment. Punishment with no teacher. Punishment with no purpose. Only habit. The monk bent down and picked up the cracked cup once more. He traced the thin line across its surface with one finger. This crack, it reminds us to carry the cup carefully. It does not stop the cup from holding water. He looked gently at the traveler. The same is true of your heart. It was never meant to become perfect. It was meant to become compassionate. The traveler looked toward the cedar tree, toward the weathered temple, toward the old bamboo broom resting quietly against the wall. Nothing around him had escaped the touch of time. Nothing had remained untouched. And yet, everything still belonged exactly where it was, for the first time. He wondered if forgiveness was not the reward for becoming perfect, but the courage to accept that he never needed to be. The question remained in the air. If you opened the prison door today, would you know how to live as a free man? The traveler did not answer, not because he refused to, but because he genuinely did not know. He had lived with guilt for so many years that he no longer remembered who he had been before it. The monk did not wait for a reply. He slowly walked toward an old cedar tree standing near the edge of the courtyard. Its trunk was wide. Its bark carried the marks of countless seasons. Storms had bent its branches. Lightning had scarred one side of its trunk, yet it remained firmly rooted. The monk rested his hand against the rough bark. "Tell me, what do you see?" The traveler looked carefully. "A very old tree. What else?" "It has been damaged," the monk smiled. "Yes, it has. But would you call it a broken tree?" The traveler studied it again. For the first time, he noticed tiny green shoots growing from one of the oldest branches. Birds had built a nest high above them. Fresh needles covered the outer limbs. Life had never stopped flowing through it. "No," he admitted quietly. "It is still alive." The monk nodded. "So why do you call yourself broken? When you continue to grow?" The traveler lowered his eyes. He had no answer. For years, he had believed guilt was proof that he cared, proof that he loved deeply, proof that he was taking responsibility. Without guilt, he feared he would become careless. Without guilt, he feared he would dishonor the people he had hurt. The monk seemed to hear the thoughts that remained unspoken. There is something many people misunderstand. They believe guilt and love are the same thing. They are not. The traveler looked up. "If I stop feeling guilty, does that not mean I no longer care?" The monk gently shook his head. "No, it means you have finally stopped hurting yourself." He paused. "Love remembers, guilt repeats. Love learns, guilt punishes. Love opens the heart. Guilt keeps the wound alive." The traveler felt those words settle deep inside him. How many times had he confused punishment with responsibility? How many years had he believed that suffering was the price of love? The monk picked up a small clay cup resting beside the temple steps. It had a thin crack running from its rim almost to its base. He filled it with water from a nearby jar. The traveler watched carefully. The cup did not leak. The monk held it out. "Would you refuse this cup because it has a crack?" The traveler smiled faintly. "No, it still serves its purpose." The monk nodded. "And yet, when people discover a crack within themselves, they decide they are no longer worthy of being held." The traveler looked down at his own hands. The scars, the wrinkles, the trembling that had come with age. For years, he had looked at himself the same way he imagined others would look at that cracked cup. Damaged, less valuable, never quite enough. The monk carefully placed the cup back upon the stone. In this temple, we keep every cracked cup, every repaired bowl, every weathered broom, because time has touched them, and time touches everything. The traveler felt an unexpected warmth rise inside his chest. Perhaps he had been measuring himself by a standard that nothing in nature had ever followed. The oldest tree carried scars. The oldest stones carried cracks. Even the temple itself leaned slightly after so many years. Yet none of those things had become less beautiful, only more honest. The monk looked toward the mountains. There is another reason people hold on to guilt, the traveler waited. They fear forgiveness will erase the lesson. He nodded slowly. I have thought that. The monk smiled kindly. But tell me, has your suffering made the lesson clearer? Or has it only made you tired? The traveler closed his eyes. He knew the answer immediately. He had learned the lesson many years ago. Everything after that had simply been punishment. Punishment with no teacher. Punishment with no purpose. Only habit. The monk bent down and picked up the cracked cup once more. He traced the thin line across its surface with one finger. This crack, it reminds us to carry the cup carefully. It does not stop the cup from holding water. He looked gently at the traveler. The same is true of your heart. It was never meant to become perfect. It was meant to become compassionate. The traveler looked toward the cedar tree, toward the weathered temple, toward the old bamboo broom resting quietly against the wall. Nothing around him had escaped the touch of time. Nothing had remained untouched. And yet, everything still belonged exactly where it was. For the first time, he wondered if forgiveness was not the reward for becoming perfect, but the courage to accept that he never needed to be. The following day, the traveler woke before the temple had fully come to life. No bell announced the beginning of the day. No voice called the monks together. Life simply unfolded, as quietly as the mist drifting through the cedar trees. He stepped into the courtyard. The old monk was nowhere to be seen. Only a wooden bucket rested beside the well. Next to it, several empty clay cups waited on a weathered table. The traveler looked around. The temple was silent. Without thinking, he picked up the bucket. The water inside was cold and perfectly clear. One by one, he began filling each cup, the first, the second, the third. His movements were careful, almost respectful. Then, as he reached for another cup, his hand froze. A thin crack stretched across its side. It was deeper than the one he had seen the day before. He turned the cup slowly. The crack reached almost to the bottom. "This one should not be here," he whispered to himself. He searched the shelves until he found another cup without a single mark. It looked newer, cleaner, better. He placed the cracked cup aside. Moments later, the monk quietly entered the courtyard. He noticed the cups immediately. Then his eyes settled upon the one resting alone at the end of the table. You chose another, the traveller nodded. This one is damaged. The monk walked over, picked up the cracked cup, filled it with water. They both waited. Not a single drop escaped. The traveller looked surprised. It still holds. Yes, the monk smiled. It always has, the traveller hesitated. But one day, it may break. The monk laughed softly. My friend, so may we. For a moment, neither man spoke. The monk carried the cracked cup toward a small wooden bench beneath the cedar tree. He placed it carefully in the sunlight. Do you know why I keep this cup? The traveller shook his head. The monk rested beside it. Many years ago, a young monk dropped it. He believed he had ruined something precious. He apologized over and over again. He begged me to throw it away. The traveller listened quietly. But every morning, I poured tea into this very cup. For years, the monk gently touched the old crack with his finger. Eventually, the young monk stopped seeing the crack. He only saw the tea. The traveller smiled. I wish people could do that. The monk looked directly at him. They can. They simply choose not to. The words lingered. A cool breeze passed through the courtyard. Somewhere nearby, a small bird landed beside the bench. It tilted its head, then pecked gently at the ground. The traveller watched it for a long moment. The bird paid no attention to the cracked cup. It cared only that water rested inside. The monk noticed the direction of his gaze. Birds never ask whether the cup is perfect. They only ask, does it still offer water? The traveller looked back at the cup. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, he looked at himself. For years, every time he thought about his own life, his eyes searched for cracks, mistakes, failures, regrets. He had almost forgotten to ask a far more important question. Can I still offer kindness? Can I still offer wisdom? Can I still offer love? The crack had become so large in his mind that he had stopped seeing everything it still carried. Without saying a word, the monk poured warm tea into the cracked cup. Steam slowly rose into the cool air. He handed it to the traveller. For a brief moment, the traveller hesitated, as though he were afraid it might break in his hands. The monk smiled. You trust strangers more easily than yourself. The traveller accepted the cup. His fingers wrapped gently around the warm clay. Nothing happened. The cup did not shatter. It did not leak. It simply held the tea, exactly as it had been created to do. The traveller lifted it slowly, took one quiet sip. The tea was warm, simple, unforgettable. He looked once more at the crack running across the clay. Then something unexpected happened. For the first time, he stopped wondering whether the cup deserved to exist. Instead, he felt grateful that someone had never thrown it away. The wind carried the scent of cedar through the courtyard. The monk quietly picked up the empty bucket. There is someone, he said gently, who has been waiting many years for you to look at yourself the same way. The traveller remained seated beneath the tree, holding the cracked cup carefully, as though, for the very first time, He understood that being imperfect had never prevented it from being useful. The cracked cup remained in the traveller's hands long after the tea had grown cool. He traced the thin line running across its surface. It no longer looked like damage. It looked like history. The monk had already disappeared beyond the cedar trees. The traveller stood, carefully returned the cup to its place, then wandered beyond the temple courtyard. A narrow stone path curved gently down the mountainside. He had not noticed it before. Curiosity quietly drew him forward. The forest welcomed him with the soft fragrance of cedar and pine. Sunlight slipped between the branches in scattered ribbons. Some places glowed warmly. Others remained wrapped in gentle shadow. Nothing hurried, not the trees, not the wind, not even the clouds drifting above the mountain. After walking for some time, he heard the sound of flowing water. A small stream crossed the path. Its water was so clear that every smooth stone beneath its surface could be seen. A simple wooden bridge stretched across it, old, weathered. Its railing leaned slightly to one side. The traveller stopped. For no reason he could explain. He did not step forward. He simply stood there, looking, listening, waiting. The bridge was sturdy enough. He knew that. Yet something inside him hesitated. Behind him, a quiet voice spoke. "You stopped." The traveller turned. The monk stood several steps away, carrying a small bundle of firewood. "I did. Why?" The traveller looked back at the bridge. "It looks old." The monk smiled. "So do I." The traveller laughed quietly. The monk walked toward the bridge without hesitation. Each wooden plank gave a soft creak beneath his feet. The sound echoed through the trees, yet the bridge held him easily. He reached the other side, then looked back. "It has carried me for many years." The traveller still did not move. The monk asked gently, "Do you know what is interesting about fear?" The traveller shook his head. "It often arrives long after danger has already left." Those words settled quietly into the forest. The traveller stared once more at the bridge. He remembered another bridge, many years ago. Not this one. A different river, a different season, a different life. He had crossed that bridge in anger, certain that he was right. Certain that there would always be another chance to return. There had not been. The memory appeared with surprising clarity, not because the wooden bridge before him resembled the old one, but because his heart had quietly connected them. His breathing became shallow. His hands tightened. The monk noticed. He did not interrupt. Instead, he placed the bundle of firewood upon the ground, picked up a fallen branch, and gently tossed it into the stream. Both men watched. The current carried it away without resistance. "It does not argue with the river," the monk said. "It simply moves." The traveller remained silent. "You are not afraid of this bridge," the monk continued. "You are standing on another bridge entirely." The traveller slowly closed his eyes. He understood. He had not been looking at weathered wood. He had been looking at a memory. The bridge before him had done nothing, Yet another bridge, built only inside his mind, had stopped his feet. The monk stepped back onto the wooden planks. He did not call the traveler. He did not persuade him. He simply crossed once, then crossed back again, calmly, as though walking across an ordinary path. Finally, he rested one hand upon the railing. Every bridge asks only one thing, the first step. The traveler looked at the flowing stream. Nothing beneath it remained still. Every drop of water that passed was immediately replaced by another. The river never clung to the water it had already carried. It never tried to pull yesterday back upstream. It simply continued, without resentment, without regret. He took a slow breath, then placed one foot upon the first wooden plank. It creaked softly. His heart beat faster, but the bridge did not collapse. He took another step, then another. Halfway across, he stopped, not because he was afraid anymore, but because he suddenly realized something. For years, he had believed healing would feel dramatic, like chains breaking, like thunder, like a mountain suddenly moving. Instead, healing felt like this: one careful step, followed by another. The monk waited patiently on the opposite side. When the traveler finally reached him, neither man spoke. There was nothing left to explain. The bridge had already taught its lesson. The traveler turned back and looked across the stream. The bridge looked exactly the same as before, old, weathered, quiet. The only thing that had changed was the man who had crossed it. And sometimes the world does not need to become different. Only the one who is looking at it does. The traveler and the monk continued along the narrow mountain path. Neither of them spoke. The forest did not seem to mind. The wind whispered gently through the cedar branches. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker tapped patiently against an old tree. The traveler noticed something curious. The monk never walked quickly, yet he never seemed slow. Each step arrived exactly when it was needed. Nothing more, nothing less. After a while, the path began to climb. Scattered rocks covered the trail. Some were no larger than a hand. Others rested half buried beneath the earth after countless seasons of rain. The monk suddenly stopped. He bent down, picked up a large stone, then placed it into the traveler's arms. The traveler caught it instinctively. It was surprisingly heavy. He looked at the monk with a puzzled expression. "What should I do with this?" the monk smiled. "For now, simply carry it." The traveler waited for more instructions. None came, so he continued walking. The stone was awkward, its rough edges pressed against his forearms. Within only a few minutes, his shoulders began to ache. He shifted it from one arm to the other, then back again. Nothing helped. The monk continued walking peacefully ahead, as though he had forgotten the stone entirely. The traveler finally asked, "How much farther?" The monk answered without turning around. "A little farther." They continued climbing. The path became steeper. The traveler breathed harder. The stone felt heavier with every step. He stopped again. "This makes no sense." The monk looked back. "Does it?" It serves no purpose. The monk simply nodded. Perhaps, the traveller sighed, then continued. Several more minutes passed. Sweat gathered across his forehead. His hands had begun to tremble. At last, unable to continue, he carefully lowered the stone onto the ground. The relief was immediate. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. He stretched his aching fingers. The monk walked back toward him. "Why did you put it down?" The traveller looked surprised. "Because it was too heavy." The monk tilted his head slightly. "But I never told you to carry it this far." Silence. The traveller stared at him. "You did not?" The monk smiled gently. "No, I only asked you to carry it. I never asked you to keep carrying it." The traveller looked at the stone, then back at the monk. A slow smile appeared, small at first, then larger. He began to laugh, not loudly, not wildly, just the quiet laughter of someone who has suddenly discovered how long he has been making his own life more difficult. The monk laughed with him. The human mind is remarkable. It hears one instruction and quietly invents another. The traveller nodded. "I assumed I was supposed to carry it until you told me otherwise. And how often have you done that in your life?" The laughter faded. The question remained. The traveller thought about the memory he had carried for so many years. No one had ever said, "You must punish yourself forever." No one had ever demanded, "You are never allowed to be happy again." No one, except himself. The monk sat upon a nearby rock. There is a strange comfort in carrying unnecessary weight. The traveller looked puzzled. Comfort? Yes, if you continue carrying it. You never have to discover who you might become without it. The traveller stood quietly. Those words reached a place inside him he had carefully avoided for years. Who would he be? Without guilt? Without regret? Without constant self-punishment? He did not know. Perhaps that uncertainty had frightened him more than the pain itself. The monk picked up the stone once more. He carried it only a few steps, then gently placed it beside the path. "Now," he said, "it belongs exactly where it should." The traveller watched the stone resting peacefully beneath the cedar trees. It looked strangely beautiful. It had not disappeared. It had not been destroyed. It had simply been returned to where it belonged. The monk brushed a little dust from his hands. "Letting go," he said softly, "does not mean pretending something never existed. It means stopping yourself from carrying what was never meant to become part of your identity." The traveller looked down at his empty hands. For the first time in many years, they felt light, not because every burden had vanished, but because he had finally noticed something. There is a great difference between holding something for a moment and believing you must carry it forever. As they continued along the mountain path, the traveller did not look back at the stone. Not because he had forgotten it, but because he finally understood. Some things teach us the lesson they were meant to teach only after we set them down. By the time they returned to the temple, the sun had climbed higher above the mountains. The courtyard was no busier than before. A young novice quietly swept fallen leaves near the entrance. An elderly woman placed a small basket of vegetables beside the kitchen door. No one hurried, no one raised their voice. The traveler wondered if time moved differently here. After a simple meal, the monk stood. "Come!" They walked beyond the temple walls. A narrow trail descended toward a quiet lake hidden among the trees. Its surface rested without a ripple near the shore. A small wooden boat was tied to an old post. The rope had faded from years beneath the sun and rain. The monk untied it, then stepped inside. He motioned for the traveler to join him. The traveler hesitated. "I have not rowed a boat in many years," the monk smiled. "The lake remembers better than we do." The traveler stepped carefully into the boat. It rocked gently beneath his weight. The monk handed him a single wooden oar. "Push." The traveler planted the oar into the water. The boat moved away from the shore. Only a little. The lake welcomed them without resistance. The traveler rowed again. Slowly, the temple became smaller behind them. The mountains reflected perfectly upon the still water. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Only the quiet rhythm of the oar breaking the surface, then disappearing beneath it again. Eventually, the monk asked, "Do you know why people love calm water?" The traveler looked across the lake. "Because it is peaceful," the monk nodded. "And do you know why calm water frightens some people?" The traveler looked puzzled. "No, because it reflects everything." The traveler lowered his eyes. His own face looked back at him from the water. Older, gentler, still carrying sadness, but no longer consumed by it. The monk reached toward the bottom of the boat. He picked up the thick rope they had untied from the shore. Without saying a word, he dropped one end into the water. The other end remained tied firmly around a wooden post at the back of the boat. The traveler continued rowing. One stroke, then another, then another. After several minutes, he frowned. "We are barely moving." He rowed harder. Water splashed against the sides of the boat. His breathing became heavier. Still, the shoreline remained strangely close. Confused, he looked behind him. Only then did he notice the rope stretching tightly across the water. The boat was still tied to the shore. He laughed softly. "I forgot," the monk asked gently. "Forgot what?" "The rope." The monk nodded. "You rowed with all your strength. I did. But did your effort matter?" The traveler slowly shook his head. "No." "Why not?" "Because something was still holding the boat." Silence settled over the lake. The traveler stared at the rope. How obvious it seemed now. How impossible it had been to notice while all his attention was fixed on rowing harder. The monk spoke quietly. "Many people live exactly this way. They work harder. They think harder. They pray harder. They blame themselves harder. But they never stop to ask, what is still tying me to the shore?" The traveler looked across the water. His heart began to beat a little faster. How many years had he spent rowing, trying harder, trying to become worthy, trying to outrun regret, trying to deserve peace, all while something invisible remained tied deep inside him. The monk leaned over the side of the boat. His fingers rested lightly upon the rope. This is not a bad rope. It simply no longer belongs to this journey. With one calm movement, he untied it. Nothing dramatic happened. No loud sound. No sudden burst of light. The boat simply began to drift. Almost immediately, the traveler felt the difference. Without changing the way he rowed, the boat moved effortlessly across the lake. He stopped rowing altogether. Still, the boat continued gliding forward upon the gentle current. The monk smiled. "Notice something?" The traveler watched the shoreline slowly disappear behind them. "I am no longer fighting the lake." "No, you never were. You were fighting the rope." The traveler closed his eyes. A quiet realization settled deep within him. Perhaps he had never been fighting life. He had never been fighting the past. He had been fighting the invisible beliefs that kept tying him to both. The monk looked toward the open water. Most people believe freedom comes from rowing harder. He gently touched the loose rope lying at the bottom of the boat. Very few discover that freedom often begins by untying one small knot. The traveler looked down at the rope resting peacefully beside his feet. It had not disappeared. It had simply lost the power to hold him, and for the first time, he began to wonder how many knots inside his own heart had never needed to remain tied at all. When they returned to the temple, the traveler noticed something he had somehow overlooked before. Beneath the oldest cedar tree, a single wooden chair stood facing the valley. It was old, older than many of the buildings surrounding it. The wood had faded beneath years of wind and rain. One armrest had been repaired more than once, yet every morning someone carefully brushed away the dust. No one ever sat there, not the young monks, not the visitors, not even the old monk himself. For several days, the traveler watched the empty chair from a distance. Morning after morning, it remained untouched. At last, curiosity overcame him. "Who does that chair belong to?" The monk looked toward it. His eyes softened. "To no one," the traveler smiled. "Then why does everyone care for it?" The monk walked slowly toward the cedar tree. He gently brushed a fallen leaf from the seat, then rested his hand upon its worn back. "Many years ago, my teacher sat here every afternoon." The traveler waited. "He has been gone for a very long time." The monk smiled quietly. "But the chair remains." The traveler looked at the empty seat. "It must remind you of him." "It does." "Does that make you sad?" The monk thought for a moment. "Sometimes." Then he smiled again. "But not in the way it once did." The traveler sat down upon a nearby stone. "I still avoid many places." The monk turned toward him. "What kind of places?" The traveler hesitated. "There is a road I have never walked again. A small garden I cannot bear to visit. There is even a song. I stop listening whenever it begins." The monk nodded gently. You believe those places contain your pain, do they not? The monk looked toward the empty chair. No, they contain your memories. There is a difference. The traveler remained silent. The monk slowly circled the chair. My teacher laughed here. He drank tea here. He watched snow fall from this very place. He placed his hand lightly on the back of the chair. When he died, I could not walk near this tree. For a long time, the traveler listened carefully. I believed the chair had stolen my peace. The monk smiled at the thought. What finally changed? The monk looked out across the valley. One afternoon, I realized something. The chair had never been asking me to suffer. It had only been waiting for me to return. The wind stirred gently through the branches. Sunlight danced across the worn wooden seat. The traveler felt something tighten in his chest. How many places had he abandoned? How many beautiful memories had he surrendered, simply because pain had arrived there first? The monk continued. When grief first enters our lives, it places a dark cloth over everything. We begin avoiding not only the pain, but also the love that once lived beside it. The traveler lowered his head. He remembered a small apple tree. He and someone dear to him had planted it together many years before. After that painful day, he had never gone back, not once. He had convinced himself the tree belonged to sorrow. Now, for the first time, he wondered if it had always belonged to love. The monk gently sat down in the empty chair, only for a moment, then stood again. You see? The traveler nodded. I expected something terrible to happen, the monk smiled. So did I. The first time, nothing had happened. The cedar still whispered. The valley remained peaceful. The chair had not trapped the past. It had simply witnessed it. The monk looked kindly at the traveler. There are places waiting for you, not because they wish to reopen your wounds, but because they are still holding the beautiful parts of your life. The traveler looked toward the distant mountains. He imagined the old apple tree once more. Perhaps it had continued growing all these years. Perhaps every spring it had quietly offered blossoms to someone who never returned to see them. A single tear rolled gently down his cheek. Not a tear of despair, a tear of longing. Longing to meet the parts of his life he had abandoned alongside his grief. The monk rested one hand upon the old chair. One day, he said softly, you will discover that love leaves traces. So does loss. The wise heart learns to recognize the difference. The traveler looked once more at the empty chair beneath the cedar tree. For the first time, he no longer saw an empty seat. He saw a place where gratitude had quietly learned to sit beside grief. The following day, the traveler found the monk kneeling in a small garden behind the temple. It was unlike any garden he had ever seen. There were no perfect rows, no carefully arranged flowers. Wild herbs grew beside vegetables. Small stones rested wherever they had naturally settled. Nothing looked designed, yet everything belonged. The monk held a tiny cloth bag in his hands. Without speaking, he opened it. Inside were seeds. Some were no larger than grains of rice. Others were dark and round. Some looked almost too dry to contain life at all. The monk placed the bag in the traveller's hands. "Choose one." The traveller looked through them carefully. Finally, he picked the largest seed. The monk smiled. "Why that one? It looks strongest." The monk nodded. A reasonable answer. He then reached into the bag himself. From the very bottom, he selected one of the smallest seeds. "So small," the traveller said. The monk simply smiled. Together, they walked toward a patch of freshly turned soil. The monk handed the traveller a small wooden trowel. "Dig!" The traveller knelt. The earth was soft, cool beneath his fingers. He made a shallow hole, then carefully placed his seed inside. The monk planted his own beside it. They covered both with soil. When they finished, nothing could be seen. The garden looked exactly as it had before. The traveller brushed the dirt from his hands. "It feels strange." "What does? We planted something." "But it looks like nothing happened." The monk poured water gently over the earth. Many important things begin this way. The traveller looked at the ground. "I expected to see something. So does almost everyone." The monk rested the empty watering can beside the garden path. We live in a world that celebrates what can be seen. The blossom, the fruit, the harvest. He looked toward the soil. But almost no one celebrates the quiet work happening underground. The traveller stood silently. Those words reached deeper than he expected. For years, he had measured his healing the same way. Every morning, he asked himself, "Do I still feel pain? Do I still remember? Do I still regret?" Whenever the answer was yes, he believed he had made no progress at all. The monk picked up another handful of seeds. "If you return tomorrow, what will you see?" "Nothing." "And next week?" "Perhaps nothing." And yet, the monk smiled. Would the seed be doing nothing? The traveller slowly shook his head. "No, it would already be growing." "Exactly." The monk looked toward the mountains. The deepest transformations are almost always invisible. The roots grow long before the branches. The traveller closed his eyes. Perhaps that was why he had become discouraged so many times. He had been searching for flowers, while life had been quietly growing roots. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh earth through the garden. Somewhere nearby, a butterfly landed upon a small white blossom. It remained there only a moment, before floating effortlessly into the trees. The monk watched it disappear. "Tell me, when does a tree become a tree?" The traveller smiled. "When it grows." The monk shook his head gently. "No, it becomes a tree the moment the seed accepts the darkness." The traveller looked back at the freshly covered soil. Only moments ago, he had seen emptiness. Now, he imagined tiny roots, searching patiently through the earth, never rushing, never doubting, simply growing. The monk knelt once more. He placed one open hand upon the soil. So many people give up on themselves simply because they cannot yet see the roots. The traveller felt something soften inside him. For the first time, he stopped asking, "Why am I not healed?" Instead, a quieter question appeared. What quiet work is already happening within me that I have not yet learned to notice? The monk stood. He gently brushed the soil from his robes, then looked at the traveller with warm eyes. Be patient with your heart. It has been planting courage long before you notice the first sign of hope. The traveller looked once more at the small patch of earth. Nothing had appeared, no green shoot, no tiny leaf, no visible change, and yet he walked away believing more had happened there than his eyes could ever see. Late that afternoon, dark clouds slowly gathered above the mountains. The wind became cooler. The cedar branches swayed with a little more purpose. The traveller was helping a young novice carry baskets of dried herbs into the temple. No one seemed concerned. The monks simply continued their work, as though the weather were another guest passing quietly through. Soon, the first drops of rain began to fall. Not heavily, just enough to leave dark circles upon the stone path. The novice hurried inside. The traveller followed. The temple became wonderfully still. Rain tapped gently against the wooden roof. Somewhere in another room, someone quietly prepared tea. The scent of cedar mixed with the fragrance of warm wood and fresh herbs. The traveller found the old monk sitting beside a small oil lantern. The flame inside flickered softly. The monk looked up. "Would you help me?" "Of course. There are several lanterns in the storage room. Bring them here." The traveller returned, carrying 5 small lanterns. Some were old, some looked newer. One had cracked glass, another had a bent handle. The monk placed them in a row. Then, without speaking, he lit only one. Its gentle flame danced quietly. The others remained dark. The traveller waited. Nothing happened. Finally he asked, "Should I light the rest?" The monk nodded, but not with another match. The traveller looked confused. "There is only one flame." The monk smiled. "Exactly." The traveller picked up the burning lantern. Carefully, he touched its flame to the wick of another. A second light appeared, then a third, then a fourth. Soon, every lantern glowed warmly. The room felt different, not brighter because one flame had become larger, but because it had been shared. The monk watched quietly, then asked, "Did the first lantern lose anything?" The traveller looked at it. Its flame burned just as steadily as before. "No, it did not," the monk nodded. "Compassion is like this. So is forgiveness." The traveller remained silent. The monk continued, "Many people believe if they forgive themselves, they will somehow lose responsibility. They imagine compassion makes them weaker." He gently lifted the first lantern. "But tell me, did this flame become smaller by giving light to another?" The traveller slowly shook his head. "No. In fact, the room became brighter." The monk smiled. "Exactly." Rain continued falling outside. Its steady rhythm filled the silence between them. The traveller looked at the glowing lanterns. One simple flame had quietly transformed the entire room, without effort, without struggle, without becoming anything different. The monk walked toward the window. Outside, the rain had washed dust from the cedar branches. Everything looked cleaner, calmer. Many people treat kindness as though it was something that can run out. He turned toward the traveler. But the heart is not a bucket. It is a flame. The more wisely it is shared, the more darkness disappears. The traveler lowered his eyes. For years, he had offered understanding to strangers, patience to children, gentleness to friends. He could comfort someone who was grieving, encourage someone who had failed, forgive someone who had made a terrible mistake. Yet every kindness stopped the moment it reached himself. He had become a lantern, refusing to light its own corner of the room. The realization was almost painful. The monk gently placed one unlit candle beside the traveler. "Try something." The traveler looked at him. "Close your eyes." He did. "Now, imagine someone you deeply love." A familiar face appeared, warm, gentle, full of kindness. The monk continued softly. "Imagine they have made the same mistake you made. Would you speak to them the way you speak to yourself?" The traveler's breathing slowed. He already knew the answer. "No." "Would you tell them they deserve a lifetime of punishment?" "No." "Would you refuse to believe they could change?" Again, "No." The monk waited, then quietly asked, "So why does your compassion end?" "The moment it reaches your own heart?" The traveler opened his eyes. The lanterns continued glowing peacefully around them. Nothing in the room had changed, yet something inside him had. He finally understood. Self-forgiveness was not selfish. It was simply compassion, returning home. The rain gradually became lighter, one by one. The drops disappeared from the temple roof. Outside, the clouds slowly began to part. A single beam of light slipped through the opening sky. It rested gently upon the old cedar tree. The monk smiled toward the window. "Even the sun," he whispered, "never keeps its light for itself." The traveler looked at the row of glowing lanterns. For the first time, he wondered if the light he had been searching for all these years had never been missing. Perhaps it had only been waiting for him to stop hiding it from himself. The rain had passed. The temple breathed once again beneath clear skies. Tiny drops of water still clung to the cedar branches. Whenever the wind stirred, they fell softly onto the ancient stones below. The traveler wandered alone through the temple grounds. His steps had become slower, not because he was tired, but because he had stopped feeling the need to arrive anywhere. Near the back of the temple, he discovered a small wooden pavilion. Hanging beneath its roof was a bronze bell. It was old, older than anything else in the temple. Its surface carried the gentle marks of countless seasons. A thick rope hung beside it. The traveler reached toward the rope, then stopped. He remembered something. during all the days he had stayed here. He had never once heard the bell ring. Curious, he lowered his hand. At that very moment, the monk quietly appeared behind him. "You found our oldest bell," the traveller smiled. "I was wondering why no one rings it." The monk stepped beside him. For a long moment, he simply looked at the bell. Then he asked, "Do you think a bell exists only to make sound?" The traveller laughed softly. "I suppose that is its purpose." The monk smiled. "Perhaps." He gently placed one hand upon the cool bronze. "Listen," the traveller frowned. "It is silent." The monk nodded. "Is silence the absence of sound, or the place where sound is born?" The traveller did not answer. The monk slowly removed his hand. A light breeze drifted through the pavilion. The great bell swayed almost imperceptibly. A deep, gentle vibration filled the air. Not loud, not dramatic, just one soft, lingering tone. The traveller looked up in surprise. "You did not strike it?" "No," the monk smiled. "The wind did." They both listened. The sound gradually faded until silence returned once more. The monk looked toward the valley. "There are hearts like this bell. They do not need to be forced open. They simply wait for the right breeze." The traveller remained thoughtful. For years, he had tried to force himself to heal. He had demanded answers, demanded peace, demanded that grief leave on his schedule. Perhaps the heart refused such commands. Perhaps it opened only when it felt safe enough to do so. The monk walked slowly around the bell. When people suffer, they often strike their own hearts. They demand, "Why are you still hurting? Why are you not over this yet? Why are you still afraid?" He gently shook his head. But healing rarely responds to force. The traveller closed his eyes. How many times had he spoken to himself with anger? How many mornings had begun with disappointment, simply because he was not yet the person he hoped to become? The monk picked up a fallen cedar needle. He held it between his fingers. "Tell me, can you pull a flower from its seed?" The traveller smiled. "No." "Can you command winter to become spring?" "No." "Then why?" the monk asked quietly. "Have you spent so many years ordering your heart to bloom before it was ready?" The traveller felt something inside him finally soften. Not break, not disappear, simply soften. A young novice suddenly ran across the courtyard chasing a loose piece of cloth carried by the wind. He laughed as he caught it. His joy echoed through the quiet temple. The traveller watched him disappear around the corner. The monk smiled. "Did you notice something?" The child never tried to catch the wind. He only followed where it carried the cloth. The traveller nodded. "So much of life," the monk continued, "becomes lighter when we stop trying to control what has never belonged to us." The breeze returned once more. The great bell moved ever so slightly. Another quiet note drifted across the valley. This time, the traveller did not search for its source. He simply listened. The sound arrived. The sound faded. Neither moment lasted forever. and somehow that made both of them beautiful. The monk looked toward the distant mountains. The Buddha never taught people how to control life. He taught them how to stop fighting it. The traveler stood beneath the old bell for a long time after the monk had walked away. The bronze remained perfectly still, silent once more, yet he no longer thought of it as empty. He understood now some of the deepest things in life do not reveal themselves when we strike harder. They reveal themselves when we finally become quiet enough to hear what has always been there. The following morning, the traveler noticed the old monk carrying a shallow wooden basin toward the garden. Inside, clear water reflected the sky like polished glass. The monk placed the basin upon a smooth stone, then quietly walked away. No explanation, no instruction, only silence. The traveler remained where he was, watching. The water rested perfectly still. He stepped closer. His reflection slowly appeared. The familiar lines upon his face, the grey in his hair, the tiredness that had softened over the past few days. He looked older than he remembered. Yet, he no longer looked defeated. As he continued staring into the water, a single cedar needle drifted down. It landed gently upon the surface. Tiny circles spread outward. His reflection disappeared. Then, as the water settled, it returned. The traveler found himself smiling. He no longer felt surprised. The lesson had begun before a single word had been spoken. Behind him, the monk arrived carrying a folded cloth. "You were watching. I was. What did you see?" The traveler answered quietly. "My reflection disappeared. And then?" "It returned." The monk nodded. "Did your face change?" "No." "Did the water change?" "Only for a little while." The monk sat beside the basin. Thoughts are like the cedar needle. They disturb the surface, but they never become the water. The traveler listened without speaking. For years, every painful thought had felt permanent. Every regret had seemed like proof. Every fear had appeared to describe reality. He had never stopped to ask, what if they were only ripples? The monk dipped one finger into the basin. Again, the reflection disappeared. If I judged myself every time the water moved, I would spend my whole life believing my face was broken. The traveler laughed softly. "It sounds foolish," the monk smiled. "And yet, how many years have you judged yourself? Every time your mind became unsettled." The laughter slowly faded. The truth remained. The traveler lowered his eyes. There had been mornings when one painful memory ruined an entire day. One anxious thought convinced him he had made no progress. One unexpected feeling became evidence that he would never heal. Perhaps he had mistaken passing weather for the climate of his soul. The monk reached into the basin. He lifted the cedar needle from the surface, then placed it gently upon the earth. Notice something. The needle rested on the water. It never became the water. The traveler watched the tiny needle lying quietly beside the stone. Such a small thing. Yet moments ago, It had hidden an entire reflection. How many tiny thoughts had hidden his own true nature over the years? The monk stood. "Come with me." They walked toward the edge of the garden. There, an old mirror leaned against the temple wall. Its silver backing had faded with age. Small dark marks covered the edges. The traveller looked into it. His reflection appeared once again. Not perfect, not sharp, but unmistakably his. The monk asked, "Does this mirror choose who is worthy of being reflected?" The traveller shook his head. "No, it reflects everyone. The joyful. It refuses no one." The monk gently wiped a little dust from the frame. "That," he said quietly, "is the nature of awareness. It judges nothing. It simply sees." The traveller remained still. He thought about all the years he had spent fighting his own mind, trying to erase sadness, trying to destroy fear, trying to silence regret. Perhaps the wiser path had never been to fight those visitors. Perhaps it was simply to stop inviting them to become permanent residents. A soft breeze crossed the garden. The herbs swayed gently. Somewhere nearby, the novice from the temple laughed again. The sound rose into the air, then disappeared as naturally as it had arrived. The monk looked toward the valley. Happiness comes, it goes. Fear comes, it goes. Peace comes, it goes. Peace comes, it goes. He turned toward the traveller. "But the one who notices them has been here all along." The traveller closed his eyes. He listened to the wind, to the birds, to his own breathing. Thoughts continued to appear. So did memories. But something felt different. For the first time, he was not chasing them. He was not arguing with them. He was simply watching. And in that quiet watching, he discovered a space within himself that no regret had ever been able to reach. Several mornings later, the traveller awoke before the temple bell. A soft mist drifted through the valley. The mountains appeared only as quiet shadows beyond the trees. The temple still slept. Even the birds had not yet begun their songs. He stepped outside alone, without thinking. His feet carried him toward the forest path he had walked many times beside the monk. Only this morning's. No one walked beside him. The silence felt different, not lonely, simply spacious. He followed the narrow trail beneath towering cedars. The earth was damp beneath his sandals. Small drops of water clung to every leaf. Each one caught the first pale light of dawn. The forest seemed unchanged, yet something inside him had shifted. He no longer searched for lessons. He simply walked. After some time, the mist grew thicker. The familiar path slowly disappeared beneath a blanket of white. The traveller stopped. He looked ahead. Nothing. He looked behind. The trail had vanished there as well. Only trees, only silence, only mist. For the first time in many days, a familiar feeling returned. Uncertainty. He turned slowly. Which direction had he come from? He could not tell. He waited. Perhaps the mist would clear. It did not. Instead, his breathing became slightly quicker. A small voice inside him whispered, "You are lost." He stood very still. Then, another memory quietly appeared, not from his past, from the temple, from the old monk. When the water is disturbed, do not judge the reflection. The traveler closed his eyes. He took one slow breath, then another. He listened, not for answers, simply for what was already present. The wind, a distant stream, a bird calling somewhere high among the branches. Then, very faintly, the soft sound of wooden chimes, temple chimes. He smiled. The temple had never disappeared, only his ability to see it. He began walking toward the sound, not quickly, not fearfully. One careful step, then another. The mist remained, but the fear did not. Several minutes later, the trees slowly opened. The temple gate appeared before him, exactly where it had always been. The old monk was sweeping the entrance, as though he had known all along. The traveler laughed. "I became lost." The monk looked up with gentle eyes. "Did you?" "I could not see the path." The monk rested the broom against the wall. "But did the path disappear?" The traveler looked back toward the forest. "No, it was only hidden." The monk nodded. "There is a difference." The traveler stood quietly. How many times had he believed he had lost himself? After the mistakes, after the grief, after the years of regret, perhaps his true nature had never disappeared. Perhaps it had simply been hidden beneath the mist of fear, the fog of shame, the clouds of memory. The monk picked up a small fallen feather from the ground. He held it up between two fingers. When clouds cover the mountains, do the mountains cease to exist? The traveler smiled. No. When winter covers the fields, do the seeds die? No. The monk gently released the feather. The wind carried it effortlessly across the courtyard. Then remember this. There will be mornings when your heart feels heavy again. There will be days when old memories return. You may believe that you have lost your peace. He paused, then smiled. But peace is not the path. It is the mountain. The path is only how you return to it. The traveler felt those words settle deep within him. He realized something beautiful. Healing was never about reaching a place where sadness could no longer visit. It was about learning that whenever sadness arrived, there was always a path home. Even if, for a little while, it disappeared into the mist. The monk picked up his broom once more. Without another word, he continued sweeping the temple entrance. Leaf by leaf, dust by dust. The traveler watched him for a long moment, then quietly bent down. He picked up another broom leaning beside the wall, and together, without needing to speak, they cleared the path, not because it had been lost, but because, sooner or later, someone else would come searching for the way home. That evening, the traveler found the old monk sitting beneath the cedar tree once again. Between them rested a low wooden table. Upon it, a brush, a small stone ink bowl, Several sheets of handmade paper, nothing more. The monk poured warm water into the inkstone. Slowly, he ground the ink with practiced hands. Neither of them spoke. The traveler watched the black ink gradually appear, dark, smooth, patient. Finally, the monk placed the brush before him. "Write." The traveler looked surprised. "What should I write?" "A letter." "To whom?" The monk met his eyes. "To the person you have been avoiding the longest." The traveler immediately thought of someone from his past. A familiar face, a familiar name. The monk gently shook his head. "No, not that person." The traveler frowned. "Then who?" The monk smiled softly. "Your younger self." Silence settled between them. The traveler stared at the blank page. He had imagined this conversation many times. He had replayed old arguments, old apologies, old regrets, but never, not once, had he imagined speaking to the frightened man he used to be. He dipped the brush into the ink. His hand trembled. For several moments, nothing appeared on the paper. Finally, one sentence. "I am disappointed in you." He stopped. The words looked heavier than the ink itself. The monk quietly asked, "Would you like to receive that letter?" "If you were him?" The traveler lowered his eyes. "No." He folded the paper. Without another word, the monk placed a fresh sheet before him. "Try again." The traveler closed his eyes. He remembered himself many years earlier. Not the mistakes, not the failure, not the regret. He remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the impossible choices, the nights without sleep, the desperate hope that somehow everything would turn out differently. His grip on the brush softened. This time, the words arrived more slowly. "I know you were afraid." He paused. A tear fell quietly onto the paper. The ink spread gently around it. He continued. "You believed you had only one chance. You did the best you understood. You were lonely. You were exhausted. You were trying to protect people you loved." The room became perfectly still. Even the wind seemed unwilling to interrupt. The traveler kept writing, not quickly, not beautifully, simply honestly. "I have blamed you for many years. I thought punishment would somehow change what happened. It never did." His breathing became uneven. Another tear touched the paper, then another. The monk remained completely silent. He did not comfort him. He did not interrupt. Some moments need witnesses, not solutions. After a long while, the traveler placed the brush down. His hands were shaking. "I have never spoken to myself this way." The monk looked kindly at him. "I know." The traveler stared at the letter. "It feels," he searched for the word, "strange." The monk nodded. "Compassion often feels unfamiliar to those who have practiced self-punishment for many years." The traveler read the letter once more. He noticed something. There were no excuses, no denial, no attempt to erase responsibility, only understanding. For the first time, Those two things no longer felt like enemies. The monk finally asked, "Will you send it?" The traveler looked confused. "How could I?" The monk smiled. "You cannot. The man who needed these words no longer exists." The traveler looked down at the pages. The younger man was gone. He had been gone for many years. Only the accusations had remained alive. The monk reached toward the letter. He folded it carefully, then handed it back. "Keep it." "Why?" "Because there will be mornings when your old voice returns. It will tell you you have never changed. It will tell you you deserve nothing but regret." He gently touched the folded paper. "When that voice speaks, read this instead." The traveler held the letter against his chest. It felt impossibly light, yet somehow lighter than the burden he had carried for decades. The monk stood. He looked toward the stars slowly appearing above the valley. "Every heart," he said quietly, "contains two storytellers. One remembers your worst day, as though it were your entire life. The other remembers that even on your worst day, you were still a human being." The traveler looked once more at the folded letter resting in his hands. He realized forgiveness had not arrived because he discovered new facts. The past had not changed. He had. And perhaps that was the only miracle forgiveness had ever required. The next morning, the traveler rose before anyone else. The folded letter rested safely inside his robe. He did not read it again. He did not need to. Some words, once accepted, continue speaking long after the page is closed. He stepped beyond the temple gate. The forest welcomed him with its familiar silence. The air carried the clean scent of rain-soaked earth. Everything seemed quietly alive. A squirrel darted across the trail. Somewhere high above, a woodpecker tapped patiently against an old pine. The traveler smiled. For the first time in many years, he noticed small things again. Not because the world had changed, because his heart had finally begun looking outward, instead of only backward. As he followed the mountain path, he came upon a stretch of soft mud left by yesterday's rain. Across it, fresh footprints, small ones, probably a child. Beside them, larger prints, an adult walking nearby. The two paths crossed the muddy trail together, then disappeared into the trees. The traveler stopped. He found himself wondering where they were going, who they were, whether they had laughed together, whether the child had asked endless questions along the way. Without thinking, he stepped into the mud himself. His sandals left clear impressions behind, one after another. He continued walking. Several minutes later, dark clouds gathered once more. A gentle rain began to fall, not enough to send anyone running, only enough to soften the earth again. The traveler continued walking beneath the trees. When he finally turned around, his footprints had already begun to fade. Water slowly filled the shallow marks. Their sharp edges softened. Some disappeared completely. He stood watching. A quiet sadness touched him. "So quickly," he whispered. Behind him, the monk's familiar voice answered, Yes, the traveller smiled without surprise. You knew I would come here. The monk chuckled softly. No, I only knew you would eventually begin walking by yourself together. They looked at the fading footprints. The traveller spoke first. It feels strange. What does? That they disappear so easily. The monk bent down. He touched the wet earth with one finger. Do they? The traveller looked again. They are almost gone. The monk nodded toward the forest. And yet, did your walk disappear? The traveller hesitated. No, the footprints are fading. The journey is not. Silence settled gently between them. The traveller understood only part of what the monk meant. The old monk continued. Many people spend their lives trying to erase every mistake. They wish the earth would hold no trace of where they stumbled. He smiled kindly. But wisdom asks a different question. The traveller looked at him. It asks, what kind of person kept walking after the stumble? The traveller lowered his eyes. For so many years, he had stared endlessly at the marks left behind. The failures, the words spoken in anger, the opportunities missed, the people he could not save. He had believed. Those footprints defined his entire journey. Now, standing beside the fading impressions in the mud, another possibility quietly appeared. Perhaps the footprints had never been the story. Perhaps the walking was. The monk slowly continued along the trail. The traveller followed. After a short distance, they reached an enormous cedar tree. Its trunk was scarred by lightning. One side had been burned long ago. A deep crack ran from its roots nearly to its highest branches, and yet its crown was full of green needles. Birds nested among its limbs. Tiny wildflowers grew at its base. The monk rested one hand upon the rough bark. This tree has been struck more than once. The traveller gently touched the scar. It must have suffered greatly. It did, the monk smiled. But tell me, where do the birds build their nests? The traveller looked upward. In its branches? They do not fear the scar? No, they simply recognize the tree is still alive. The wind passed softly through the cedar. Its branches answered with a gentle whisper. The traveller suddenly understood. Nature never demanded perfection. Only life, only growth, only presence. It was only people who insisted scars should erase worth. The monk looked toward the valley. When you leave this place, people will still remember some of your mistakes. The traveller listened carefully. So will you. He felt his chest tighten slightly. The monk smiled. But neither memory nor regret has the authority to decide who you become next. The traveller looked once more at the scarred cedar, then back toward the muddy trail. His footprints were completely gone now, not hidden, gone, yet he had still arrived here. Still breathed this mountain air, still stood beneath this ancient tree. Perhaps life had been teaching the same lesson all along. The earth remembers only for a little while, The heart remembers much longer. Wisdom is learning which memories deserve to become roots and which were only meant to become footprints after the rain. Several mornings later, the traveler noticed something different. His bundle was packed. His walking staff rested beside the temple gate. The simple robe he had worn during his stay had been carefully folded. Without anyone saying it, he understood. It was time to leave. The realization did not bring sadness, only gratitude, the kind that arrives quietly when a place has changed you in ways you cannot yet explain. He walked one final time through the temple grounds, past the little garden, where unseen roots continued their patient work, past the old cedar tree, where an empty chair had taught him that gratitude could live beside grief, past the pavilion, where the bell had waited for the wind instead of demanding to be heard. Every place now felt familiar, not because he had memorized it, because each place now lived somewhere inside him. At last, he found the monk sweeping the entrance path, just as he had on the very first day. The broom moved slowly across the ancient stones, leaf by leaf, dust by dust. The traveler smiled. "You are still sweeping." The monk smiled back. "The wind is still blowing." They both laughed softly. For a while, neither spoke. Words no longer seemed necessary. The traveler finally bowed. "I do not know how to thank you." The monk rested both hands upon the broom. "You already have." The traveler looked puzzled. "I have?" The monk nodded. "You stayed. You listened. You allowed your heart to become softer. No greater thanks exists." The traveler lowered his eyes. "There is one question I still carry." The monk waited. "What if I forget all of this? What if I return home and become the person I was before?" The old monk smiled. Not because the question was foolish, because every traveler eventually asked it. He quietly set the broom aside, then walked toward the great wooden gate at the entrance of the temple. The traveler followed. The gate stood open, exactly as it had on the day he arrived. The monk gently placed one hand upon the weathered wood. "Tell me, when you first came here, did anyone unlock this gate for you?" The traveler thought back. "No, it was already open." The monk nodded. "And when you leave today, will anyone close it behind you?" The traveler slowly looked at the empty doorway. "No, it will remain open." The monk smiled warmly. "So why?" he asked softly. "Have you believed all these years that the gate inside your own heart was locked?" The traveler stood completely still. He looked through the open gate. Beyond it, the mountain path disappeared into the forest, the same path that had once frightened him, the same path that would now carry him home. Nothing about it had changed, only the one walking it. The monk continued. "You believed peace was something you had to earn. You believed forgiveness was something waiting far away. You believed freedom would arrive after enough punishment." He gently shook his head. "But the gate," he rested his hand once more upon the open doorway, "has always been open. The only thing keeping you outside was the belief that you were not allowed to enter." The traveller felt tears quietly gather in his eyes, not tears of sorrow, not even relief. They were the tears that appear when a truth has been standing beside you for years, waiting patiently to be noticed. The monk reached into the sleeve of his robe. He removed a single cedar seed, the smallest gift imaginable. He placed it into the traveller's hand. Plant this wherever you finally decide to stop running. The traveller looked at the tiny seed resting upon his palm. So that I will remember? The monk smiled. No, so that someone else may one day rest beneath its shade. The traveller closed his fingers gently around the seed. In that moment, he understood something he had never understood before. Healing had never belonged only to him. Every kindness he offered, every forgiveness he chose, every burden he finally laid down would quietly become shelter for someone he might never even meet. A cool breeze moved through the open gate. The cedar branches whispered overhead. Some leaves drifted lazily across the stone path. The monk stepped back. It is time. The traveller bowed deeply, not because the monk stood above him, but because gratitude naturally bows. He turned. He took several steps down the mountain path, then stopped. He looked back one last time. The monk had already returned to sweeping, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Perhaps nothing extraordinary had. An old man continued sweeping leaves. A traveller continued walking home. The mountains remained silent. The wind continued blowing, and somewhere deep inside, a gate that had never truly been closed remained quietly, beautifully open. The traveller walked for many days, through forests, across quiet valleys, past villages where no one knew his name. The mountains slowly disappeared behind him. The familiar scent of cedar gave way to open fields. Then, one afternoon, he reached the place he had spent years avoiding. The old road curved gently toward a small hill. At its crest, an apple tree stood alone. Its branches stretched wide against the blue sky. For a long time, he did not move. He simply stood at the edge of the road, watching. The tree was larger now. Its trunk had grown thick and weathered. Its branches carried dozens of ripe apples that swayed gently in the breeze. Grass surrounded its roots. Wildflowers bloomed nearby. Birds hopped from branch to branch. Life had continued here. Without asking permission from sorrow, the traveller felt his chest tighten. This was the tree. Years ago, two hands had planted the tiny sapling together. One pair belonged to him. The other belonged to someone whose laughter he still remembered. Someone whose absence had become the heaviest stone inside his heart. After that painful farewell, he had never returned, not once. He had believed coming back would reopen the wound. Instead, he had unknowingly abandoned every beautiful memory that lived here as well. Slowly, he walked toward the tree. Each step felt strangely familiar, as though the earth itself remembered him. When he finally reached the trunk, He placed one trembling hand upon the rough bark. It was warm beneath the afternoon sun. He closed his eyes. At first, only silence. Then, fragments, not of grief, but of laughter. A younger version of himself digging into the earth. Dirty hands. A crooked little sapling. Someone laughing because it leaned too far to one side. 2 cups of tea resting on the grass. Hope. Simple. Ordinary. Beautiful hope. His knees slowly weakened. He sat beneath the tree, not because he was overwhelmed, because, for the first time, the memory no longer pushed him away. It welcomed him home. A ripe apple loosened from its branch. It landed softly beside him. He picked it up. Its skin glowed deep red beneath the sunlight. Without thinking, he smiled. "So," he whispered, "you kept growing." The wind answered softly through the branches. Nearby, children's voices drifted from somewhere beyond the hill. A little girl suddenly appeared along the path. She stopped when she saw him. Her eyes immediately found the apple tree. "Mister," she asked shyly, "may I have one?" The traveler looked up. For a brief moment, the old voice returned. "They are not yours anymore." Then, another voice, gentler, quieter. "Were they ever meant to be?" He stood, reached upward, picked the ripest apple he could find, then placed it carefully into the little girl's hands. Her face lit with pure delight. "Thank you!" She ran back toward her family, laughing all the way. The traveler watched until she disappeared. Only then did he notice. He had just shared the very first fruit from a tree he once believed belonged only to his sorrow. He laughed softly. A laugh carried not by happiness alone, but by understanding. The cedar seed, the old monk's final gift. He reached into his robe. It was still there, small, almost weightless. He knelt beside the apple tree. Carefully, he dug a tiny hole a short distance from its roots, then placed the cedar seed into the earth. He covered it gently. No ceremony, no grand prayer, only one quiet sentence. "May someone I never meet one day find peace here." He rested both hands upon the fresh soil. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of apples through the air. Above him, sunlight filtered through the branches, scattering gentle patterns across the ground. The traveler suddenly understood something the monk had never spoken aloud. A healed heart does not prove its healing by forgetting. It proves its healing by becoming a place where life can begin again. He stood, looked once more at the old apple tree, then at the tiny patch of earth beside it. One tree had grown from hope. Perhaps another would grow from forgiveness. And somewhere, far beyond the mountains, an old monk was probably still sweeping fallen leaves, knowing, without needing to ask, that another traveler had finally come home. Years passed. The seasons continued their quiet dance. Spring returned. Summer ripened. Autumn released its golden leaves. Winter covered the earth with gentle silence. The traveler grew older. His hair slowly turned the color of mountain mist. Fine lines gathered around his eyes, not from worry, but from years of smiling more than he once believed possible. People who met him often asked the same question. "You seem peaceful. What happened to you?" He never answered with a long story. He never spoke of extraordinary miracles. He simply smiled, as though the answer belonged more to the listener than to himself. Sometimes a grieving widow would sit beside him. Sometimes a young father burdened by regret. Sometimes an old soldier who had carried memories heavier than stone. The traveler rarely offered advice. Instead, he listened, the way an old monk had once listened to him, patiently, without interruption, without trying to repair another person's pain before first honoring it. Often, that was enough. One autumn afternoon, a small boy wandered beneath the apple tree. The cedar beside it had begun to grow, still young, still slender, yet already casting the first hint of shade. The boy looked up. "Did you plant these trees?" The old traveler smiled. "I helped one. The other," he looked toward the ancient apple tree, "helped me." The child laughed. He did not understand. Children rarely need to. Not yet. The traveler picked 2 apples, one for the boy, one for himself. Together, they sat beneath the branches in comfortable silence. The boy finished his apple quickly, then asked, "Will these trees live forever?" The old traveler looked upward. Leaves drifted lazily through the afternoon light. "No." The boy looked surprised. "They will not? No. One day, the wind will take every leaf. The rain will soften every branch. Time will return them to the earth." The boy became quiet. "Then why plant them?" The traveler smiled. He remembered another question, another mountain, another teacher. He gently brushed a fallen leaf from the child's shoulder. "Because," he said softly, "someone deserves their shade. Even after we are gone." The boy nodded slowly. Perhaps he understood, perhaps not. Some truths arrive years after they are first heard. The afternoon breeze moved through both trees. The older apple branches answered with a deep whisper. The young cedar responded with a lighter voice. Different, yet somehow perfectly together. The traveler closed his eyes. He listened, not to the trees, but to the space between them. The silence felt familiar, like an old friend. He remembered the cracked cup, the untied rope, the empty chair, the quiet bell, the hidden path, the folded letter, the fading footprints, the open gate. One by one, they returned, not as lessons, as companions. He finally understood. The monk had never been trying to give him answers. He had been gently removing the questions that had imprisoned him. The sun slowly descended toward the distant hills. Golden light spread across the valley. Children's laughter echoed somewhere beyond the fields. Birds returned to their nests. The wind continued exactly as it always had, carrying leaves, carrying seeds, carrying forgotten songs from one season into the next. The traveler smiled toward the horizon, very softly, Almost as though speaking to the wind itself, he whispered, "I forgive you." He was not speaking to another person, nor to the younger man he had once been. He was speaking to every version of himself who had carried unbearable weight, only because he believed he had to. The breeze passed gently across his face. It carried away nothing, not the memories, not the love, not even the sorrow. It carried away only the need to keep holding them so tightly. Above him, the apple tree continued bearing fruit. Beside it, the young cedar continued reaching quietly toward the sky. Neither hurried, neither looked back. Both simply grew, exactly as life had always intended. And somewhere, far beyond the mountains, an old temple still stood. A broom still moved gently across ancient stones. A bronze bell still waited for the wind, and a gate that had never truly been closed remained open for every weary heart ready to come home.